Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Meredith and this is a channel about living life with and beyond a chronic illness. So back in June, I made an Instagram post titled 5 Things About the Disabled Experience That You Might Not Know. And in the comments, there was a lot of discourse about what language the disabled community preferred. And so I decided to take to my Instagram stories to poll y'all's preferences. And today I decided to talk about the results from those polls as well as disability language and terminology. So when it comes to identity under the framework of disability, it generally boils down to 2 schools of thought. One, that individuals with disabilities are more than their disability. So we should use language that puts identity and descriptors second to someone's personhood, aka person first language, because someone's disability or identity is just a part of who they are. So for example, person with a disability. The second school of thought on this is that disability and other sections of identity are integral parts to someone's personhood and affect how an individual perceives the world, navigates the world. And so we should frame our language in a way that acknowledges those differences, not necessarily as something negative, but just as a statement in the way that you would say short person, lesbian, black person, and in the case of ability, disabled person. Also, part of this school of thought is the idea that someone isn't disabled by their disability, but rather what is actually disabling is the societal barriers and physical barriers that disabled people face on a regular basis. So by saying disabled person, it's not necessarily a commentary on the person's abilities, but rather a commentary on the world in which a disabled person navigates. I personally fall into the second school of thought, but when I polled people on my Instagram stories, it was about a 50-50 split. So clearly disabled people don't participate in groupthink. When I was doing research for this video, I also interviewed some disabled and neurodivergent individuals, and something that my friend Brennan said when I was interviewing really stuck with me. And he said, I shouldn't have to use person first language to remind someone that I'm human. They should know that. But everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and I encourage you to discuss your opinion in the comments. And of course, you should always respect a disabled person's preferences and use the language and terminology that they prefer when referring to that specific disabled person. So I also asked on these polls and like the little questions on Instagram, some of your thoughts on terms like able-bodied and non-disabled. And here are some things that folks had to say. So 56% of you thought that able-bodied was a good descriptor. 44% of you said it made you uncomfortable because it implies disabled people aren't able. A lot of you liked the word able-bodied as a descriptor because it allows you to describe someone who might be mentally disabled but not physically disabled in a way that non-disabled doesn't really accurately portray. A lot of you also cited that able-bodied is a term that was created by disabled activists. And some of you expressed how you didn't feel that able-bodied was negative or even any sort of commentary on disabled individuals. It's just more of a statement in the way that disabled person doesn't have a negative connotation. Able-bodied is just a statement and doesn't have to have a negative connotation either. As a whole, it seems that people like the word non-disabled because it centers disability as either the norm and able-bodied as not the norm or the other, flipping the script, or just makes disability and non-disabled both part of the norm, which people seem to appreciate. One of my interviewees expressed that they preferred the term non-disabled over able-bodied, citing that able-bodied is a bit of a vague term and it begs the question, able to do what? When it came to the term handicap, there was a mixed bag of opinions on this word. And I would say that it leans slightly in the direction of, as a community, we thought that it was a bit outdated and in some cases offensive or insensitive. One response that I got that kind of made me chuckle, I just want to share with you, said this: "It's definitely not offensive or inappropriate to me, it just feels very old. Like if someone called me homosexual instead of gay or queer. Technically it's accurate and it doesn't offend me, but like, who are you, my grandma?" The next term that I asked you guys about was the term cripple. And this word, I would say, probably had the most heated opinions. Some people thought very positively of this word. Some people thought very negatively of this word. I got responses ranging from, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. There's so much trauma attached to that word. For me, I think it's an ugly word to use about disability, to I think that disabled people should be able to use it and no one else. I joke about it with my friends, but beyond that, I don't really use it. I use it for myself, but I don't necessarily use it for other people. And then there were people who were totally here for the reclamation of the word cripple in the way that the LGBT community reclaimed the word queer. And they cited movements like #CripplePunk. So as you can see, it's always just best to ask people's preferences. And a tip I always give people, like if it just doesn't seem like the time to ask people, like maybe you're in a group setting or something, and you don't want to bring up the conversation, just mirroring the language that a disabled person is using. So right now I am using identity first language. So it's pretty safe to assume that you can use identity first language towards me. But when it comes to the word cripple, I think that's different. I think there's a lot of disabled individuals who use it and have reclaimed it for themselves, but not necessarily for others. So I think that's also something to take into consideration. Then there was terms like special needs. And basically the general consensus on terms like special needs were that it implies that the needs of disabled individuals are somehow special when they're just needs. A lot of people expressed negative opinions around this language. Some things that you guys had to say were that it's used to make others feel comfortable. It implies that the needs of disabled people are special or unique, not just human needs. And sometimes special can get read as optional. Then there are terms like differently abled and unique ability. And when it came to these terms, a lot of you expressed that you felt as though these terms were belittling, or these terms were not for the disabled community. The terms really were for able-bodied people and non-disabled people, to make non-disabled people comfortable. And that it was a way for able-bodied people to avoid having to say disability as if it was a bad word, and it sugarcoats and belittles disabled individuals and their experiences. One of my interviewees expressed that terms like differently abled and unique ability, they come off as very I don't see color-esque. And they also went on to express that if the world was captioned and wheelchair accessible and just completely accessible to every type of disability, then a term like differently abled or unique ability would be appropriate. But the fact of the matter is that we don't live in that world yet. That world is not the world that we currently live in. So to say differently abled, it just kind of ignores all the societal and physical barriers that disabled individuals have to navigate on a daily basis. So personally, if you have been here since the beginning and Dysfunctioning Just Fine, and especially if you've seen Dysfunctioning Just Fine, you'll notice that in older videos and in Dysfunctioning Just Fine especially, I used to use the word differently abled a lot. And I've kind of, come to terms with that term and why I used it and my comfortability with the word disability and how much I've accepted my disability at this point. And I would say that I don't use it. I use it occasionally, but it's generally not my go-to word. But of course, if that is a word that empowers you, by all means, like, go and use it. But I think my biggest takeaway about the word differently abled is that it's really different when a disabled person says it versus an able-bodied person says it. When I say it, I'm making you acknowledge how I have to do things differently than you as an able-bodied person, if I'm talking to an able-bodied person. But when an able-bodied person says it to me, it says that it feels to me as though that person is uncomfortable saying the word disability and they need to sugarcoat it in order to make them feel good. And that doesn't feel good to me. And you should always keep in mind that different people are empowered and offended by different language and terminology, and that is okay. Lastly, when it comes to language regarding ability, I think it's important to always ask yourself some of these questions. Where am I taking my vocabulary cues off of? Is it disabled individuals? Is it non-disabled individuals or institutions? Where am I basing my knowledge on the subject from? Who am I making comfortable? Am I using this language to support disabled individuals? Or am I using language to try to make myself seem inclusive or woke or something of that nature? What's the difference between saying queer person versus a person with queerness, or black person versus a person with blackness, and saying disabled person versus a person with a disability? Do I inherently hold some sort of stigma with the word disabled that I don't with the words queer or black, or insert some other identity here? And how flexible am I to changing the terminology that I currently use? That's gonna wrap things up for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, definitely give this video a like and share it with a friend that you think might find it interesting. And be sure to hit that little red button and subscribe so you don't miss any of my new content. Thanks for watching. Bye.